Something is blocking the light inside 3i Atlas, and it shouldn't be there. The leaked frame looks wrong from the first millisecond. A geometric void where nature should produce turbulence. A stable shadow in a region that should be nothing but chaotic dust. And this isn't a grainy smear from a distant telescope. This is a structure that survives across every wavelength, every exposure, every instrument we throw at it, as if someone built something and wrapped it in ice. Add to that Avi Loeb's statistical grenade. The probability that its encounter with Jupiter happened naturally is 0.00005%. If you think that sounds engineered, you're not alone. Stay with me as we walk through the evidence, the orbital mechanics, the geometry of the shadow, the institutional silence, because by the end, you'll understand why several researchers have quietly started using the word parking and what that means for us. If this mystery grabs you the way it grabbed me, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world, because things are about to get much stranger than you think. I'm staring at the monitor right now, still shaking a little. I wasn't supposed to see this frame. No one was. It came through an internal NOAA forward channel, mislabeled, probably by a grad student half asleep during night shift. But once it was on my screen, I couldn't unsee it. I replayed the sequence 12 times, adjusting the filters, trying to convince myself it was compression, diffraction, something mundane. My coffee went cold without me ever tasting it. I kept wiping my glasses, convinced the smear wasn't on the data but on my lens. But it wasn't. The anomaly held steady, a clean-edged shadow inside a coma that should be boiling with dust and gas. And the worst part? The shadow doesn't rotate with the comet. It stays fixed relative to the stars behind it, like something with its own orientation independent of the nucleus. I can feel my heartbeat in my palms just saying it out loud. You have to understand, comets don't do that. Nothing natural does that. Still, I was trained not to jump to conclusions, so I forced myself to walk through the official explanation the team prepared last week. According to the senior group, 3i Atlas is just an anomalous fragmenting comet, an interstellar dirty snowball cracking under thermal stress. And look, fragmentation does happen. We've seen comets shed pieces before, sometimes dramatically. The formal statement reassures everyone that this object is exactly that: fragile, unstable, breaking apart, misleading our measurements. They say the mass discrepancy is a mirage created by distributed fragments. They say the shadow is a density gradient or backscatter artifact. They say everything is fine. But if everything is fine, why did the room go silent when the new HRI sequence came in? Why did Dr. Miller from Caltech excuse himself and not come back? Why did two people ask whether the data pipeline had been tampered with, one of them whispering the word external like it was toxic? I try to stay rational, but every time I zoom in, the shadow stares back with the calm, symmetrical defiance of something that knows exactly what it's doing. Here's the part the public hasn't heard yet. The new trajectory refinement came in at 3:14 a.m. I watched the solver converge frame by frame, the blue curve tightening, the error bar shrinking, the predictive cone collapsing into a narrow ribbon. For the last 3 months, Atlas has been slipping out of our gravitational grip exactly as expected. Outbound, fading, arcing back toward deep space. But tonight, the bend bent. Not much at first. Just a nudge, a deviation so small you'd miss it unless you were specifically watching for perturbed dynamics. I was watching. And that bend, God, that bend, it changed everything. The new vector shows Atlas adjusting, subtly, smoothly, like something responding to a force we didn't model, or to an intention we didn't include. I remember whispering no to the empty lab, not because I didn't believe the numbers, but because I did. My hands started tingling. I felt like I was falling, even though I was sitting down. I reran the solver twice, same result. I pulled the previous 10 nights of astrometry and stitched them into a rolling fit, same trend. Then I saw the part that made me sit back so fast, my chair slammed into the cabinet behind me. The deviation was bending toward the ecliptic, not into the void, not even harmlessly away, downward, toward us, toward Earth's orbital plane. Not a collision course, not even close, but a drift that shouldn't exist unless something is redistributing mass internally or generating thrust or responding to forces we don't understand. I told myself it had to be jets. Outgassing can create small accelerations. We've seen that in solar system comets. But then I pulled up the thermal emission map. The jets aren't pointing in the direction that would create this shift. In fact, they're pointing almost opposite. If this were natural, Atlas should be bending away from the plane, not toward it. I sat there for a full minute without blinking. My throat felt tight, like the room was getting smaller. Every scientist has a moment when they realize the data isn't wrong, their assumptions are. This was mine. Around 4:03 a.m., a message pinged through an encrypted Slack thread. It was just one sentence from an astronomer I won't name. If it keeps bending at this rate, we need to talk about the non-natural models again. I stared at that line for a long time. The again hit harder than the rest, because it meant the conversations never really stopped. They just went underground. I asked for clarification. The reply came 30 seconds later. Some of us ran projections. If the object ever corrects toward Earth rather than just toward the plane, the statistical likelihood of natural behavior drops to nearly zero. I felt a chill crawl across my scalp. They weren't supposed to say that. No one was. The official consensus, the one the public hears, is that this is a fragmenting interstellar comet with some measurement noise, an exotic but harmless relic from another star. But internally, the discussion is shifting, quietly, carefully. No one uses the word craft. That would be career suicide. But they do say non-gravitational control behavior. They do say stability inconsistent with volatile-driven jets. They do say shadow geometry incompatible with rotational dynamics. I keep thinking about that shadow. How still it is. How patient. Like it's waiting for something, or watching something, or hiding something. At 4:22 a.m., the internal report draft hit the server. I opened it instantly, scanning for the line I already knew would be there. And there it was, written with the clinical restraint of someone terrified of what they're implying. While the probability remains extremely low, we cannot completely exclude the possibility of artificial origin. Do you understand what it means for scientists to write that sentence? Not YouTubers, not bloggers, scientists, people who would sooner set their hair on fire to invoke extraterrestrial engineering without overwhelming evidence. For them to say the chance isn't zero means the evidence isn't zero. But that's not even the part that's keeping me awake. The last page contains a prediction map, a projection of Atlas's path over the next 18 months. A blue curve for the expected trajectory, a red curve for the observed deviation trend, and a dotted black curve labeled if directed. That dotted black curve passes within 0.02 AU of Earth. Close enough that if Atlas ever follows it,
my pulse is hammering again, just remembering it. I asked a senior dynamicist in the thread, what are we supposed to conclude if it heads directly for us? He responded instantly, as if he'd been waiting for the question. If it vectors toward Earth, it isn't a comet. No hesitation, no qualifiers. That's when I realized the truth the public hasn't been told. We're already past the point of debating whether Atlas is normal. It isn't. The mass anomaly, the stable shadow, the trajectory bend, any one of these would be odd. All of them together form a pattern, something that feels deliberate. And yet, and this is the part that's almost harder to accept, not deliberate doesn't mean alien. The senior team insists on this point. They think there's an explanation we haven't found yet, an internal density gradient, a novel fragmentation regime, a sublimation process we've never modeled. They're not closing the door on extraterrestrial hypotheses, but they're leaning hard on the idea that we're witnessing an extreme outlier, not a visitor. They believe nature has more imagination than we give it credit. I want to believe that too. I really do. But the shadow remains, and the drift continues. It's 4:47 a.m. now. The lab is silent. The east-facing windows are turning the color of weak silver, that pre-sunrise glow that makes everything feel fragile. I'm running the solver again even as I speak. The new data points slide into place like beads on a wire. And there it is. The bend sharpened by another fraction. Imperceptible to anyone outside this room. Impossible to ignore once you've seen it. I swallow hard. My mouth tastes metallic. I think about the dotted black line. I think about the analysts whispering about parking or controlled drift or non-natural stability. I think about the shadow that isn't rotating. And I realize something I shouldn't say out loud but can't stop thinking. If this thing ever comes back toward us, if Atlas turns around, if it chooses a trajectory that intersects Earth's orbital path, then the debate is over. Because comets don't choose. And whatever chooses is not a comet. I'm going to keep the recorder running because the next set of data is coming in. And if the bend continues... God, it's loading now. Hold on. Wait. Oh, no, it shifted again. Slightly. Sharper, closer to the plane. Closer to that dotted line. I need to get this out before the others arrive. Before the official messaging smothers it. If Atlas keeps bending like this, you need to remember what I said. You need to remember these words exactly. If it heads for Earth, it's not a comet. And whatever it is, it knows we're watching.
I didn't sleep after what happened last night. I didn't even try. By the time the sun finally pushed its pale light across the lab's windows, I was still sitting in the same chair, watching the solver graphs crawl across the screen like silent seismographs of a world about to tilt. I kept expecting someone to burst into the room and tell me the data was corrupted, that the instrument was misaligned, that I'd hallucinated the entire shift in the trajectory. But no one came. Instead, at 7:12 a.m., the first official bulletin dropped into the internal channel, stamped with the kind of cautious, bureaucratic language that always shows up when the truth is more dangerous than the wording allows. Trajectory deviation persists. Uncertain cause. No indication of collision risk. Those last 6 words read like someone whispering, "Don't panic," into a burning room. I stared at them until the letters blurred. Because the truth is, no one really knows what "no indication of collision risk" means anymore. The analysts downstairs are already split into 2 groups. Those who think the deviation is random thermal asymmetry from fragmentation, and those who believe we're seeing the early stages of controlled drift. No one says alien. They all say controlled drift. But their eyes say the quiet part, even if their mouths don't. Around 8 a.m., I walked into the briefing room. The fluorescents were too bright, humming like a warning. Dr. Rosen was already there, hunched over the big table with her hair tied back. The kind of posture scientists take when they've been awake too long, and the weight of the evidence is turning into something emotional. She didn't look up when I came in. Neither did Dr. Hayes, who kept flicking through the spectrograph results with the jittery agitation of someone trying to find an escape hatch in numbers. "You saw the bend," Rosen said, without any greeting. Not a question, a fact. I nodded. My throat felt dry. "Any updates on the jets?" She shook her head. "They're too weak. They can't account for the lateral acceleration. Even if we assume multiple hidden vents, the vector is wrong. Physics is not cooperating with the natural models." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because hearing her say it out loud made something inside me drop, like a floor falling out from under a trapped elevator. Hayes finally spoke, his voice thin and stretched. We ran 9 independent fragmentation models. None of them produced this curvature unless you assume asymmetric mass shedding in a direction opposite to the observed dust trails. He looked at me then, searching for confirmation, or maybe for permission to be afraid. I didn't give him either. So the models fail? All 9? He didn't blink. All 9. The room felt smaller, like the walls were slowly leaning inward. I sat down, trying to keep my breathing steady, and pulled up the shadow frames from last night. The structure, if I'm allowed to use that word, is still there, stable. A dark, clean-edged void floating inside the expanding coma like a negative print of something with intent. When Hayes saw the frame, he exhaled sharply. That's not scattering. Not an opinion. A verdict. Before I could respond, the conference monitor flickered to life, and Dr. Avery from NASA's NEO office appeared, his face drawn tight, the skin under his eyes bruised by lack of sleep. Behind him, I could see the glow of half a dozen other screens reflecting orbital projections. He didn't waste time. He said, "We updated the drift curve. It's accelerating." A cold line traced down my spine. "How much?" Rosen asked. Avery hesitated just long enough to make every heartbeat in the room turn into a countdown. 17% since last night. My mind split into two. One half searching frantically for a natural explanation, the other half whispering the truth none of us wanted to admit. 17% isn't thermal noise. It isn't dust pressure. It isn't fracturing. It's a message written in math. Atlas is going somewhere on purpose. Avery continued, his voice dropping into a tone people use when they're trying very hard not to alarm anyone. The current vector brings the object into our orbital neighborhood in 21 months. Not an impact, just proximity. Proximity. The word felt deceptive, like calling a loaded gun a decorative weight. "And what happens if the bend continues?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. When he did, the words sounded like they hurt to produce. "If it continues, Earth becomes the most energy-efficient intercept point." Rosen swore under her breath. Hayes rubbed his face with both hands. Avery leaned closer to the camera. "And I need everyone in this room to understand something. If it chooses efficiency over momentum, that tells us more than we're ready to process." A heavy, suffocating silence settled over us. I think that was the moment I realized none of us were ever going to be the same after this. Some discoveries changed the world. Others changed the people who witnessed them. The briefing spiraled into an avalanche of data after that. Infrared maps, radio reflections, coma density curves, rotational estimates. But none of it mattered. The shadow remained. The drift remained. The 17% shift remained. And under all of it pulsed one terrifying question: what does an interstellar object want? After the meeting, I stepped outside the building for the first time in hours. The morning air tasted metallic, like a storm was brewing even though the sky was painfully clear. People walked past me, sipping coffee, checking their phones, living inside a reality that hadn't cracked open yet. I envied them in a way I didn't expect. Ignorance isn't bliss, but it is armor. Mine was gone. Back in the lab, a notification chimed. It was a secure message from a colleague at MIT, someone known for staying aggressively away from speculative interpretations. The fact that she wrote me at all meant trouble. Her message contained only one line. "Have you considered the rotation mismatch?" I frowned, typed back, "Explain." Her reply came almost instantly. If the shadow were internal mass concentration, the rotational wobble would align. It doesn't. The void isn't rotating with the nucleus. My breath caught. I zoomed into the still frames. She's right. The nucleus tumbles. The jets oscillate. But the shadow, whatever it is, stays anchored to an external axis. You'd only see that if the object creating the shadow had its own stabilizing system. A natural object can't do that. Not at that scale, not with that coherence. I typed, "Are you suggesting—" Before I could finish, she sent one more message. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm saying the data is suggesting things I don't want to say." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles as if they might rearrange into answers. Another ping, this time from the Penn State group. An attachment, a preliminary gravitational harmonics analysis. My stomach tightened as I scrolled. The harmonics show periodic fluctuations. Tiny, but precise, rhythmic pushes that shouldn't exist unless something inside Atlas is oscillating intentionally, or regulating, or stabilizing. My fingers went cold. I messaged them, "Have you published?" Their answer, "No, and we won't. Not yet." Around noon, the emergency call went out. Full panel briefing. All institutions, no exceptions. That never happens unless something is seriously wrong. I joined the call. The gallery filled with faces. NASA, MIT, JPL, Harvard, Caltech, SETI, every heavy hitter in the scientific world, all staring into their cameras with haunted eyes. Dr. Avery spoke first. He said, "We have consensus on one point. Public communications must emphasize the natural explanation." No one objected. Not because they believed it, but because the alternative would tear the world in half. The second point came from Rosen. Her voice shook, just barely. "We acknowledge a non-zero probability of artificial origin." Several people looked away.
A few closed their eyes. Hayes whispered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer or a curse. The third point was the one that hit hardest. Avery again. "We have located the region Atlas is drifting toward. If the deviation continues, its path will intersect with Earth's orbital zone. And if the object alters course directly toward the planet at any stage—" He paused. His jaw tightened. "Then it is not behaving like a comet." The silence after that was suffocating. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Eventually, someone from Harvard asked the question everyone avoided. "Do we warn the public?" Rosen answered, "Not yet. Not until we know whether the drift is sustained. Misinterpreting the data could cause mass panic. We need more confirmation." Hayes cut in, his voice cracking. "And if the confirmation comes too late?" No one answered. The call ended with more tension than it began. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the black screen, realizing that for the first time in my career, I wasn't sure if knowledge was a blessing or a blade. Around 3 p.m., another data packet arrived. New positional markers, thermal curves, jet maps. I loaded it mechanically, feeling the kind of dread usually reserved for medical test results. The solver processed the numbers, the graph updated, and there it was, the bend again, sharper, more deliberate. I whispered, "Why are you coming back?" My voice sounded smaller than I expected. The lights in the lab flickered, just once, but enough to pull me out of my spiral. I stared at the screen. The new path wasn't subtle. Atlas wasn't drifting randomly. It was aligning, slowly, precisely, toward the plane, toward us, but not directly,
Not yet. Like something calibrating, testing, measuring. I thought back to Avery's words, if it ever chooses Earth, it isn't a comet. And now another question bloomed inside me, darker than all the others. If it isn't a comet, then what does it want from us? I closed the report and opened the shadow image again. That quiet void, that impossible stillness, that presence. And for the first time, I felt it, not just intellectually, but in my bones. The sense that we weren't looking at a piece of rock and ice. We were being observed, evaluated, judged. I don't know what Part 3 will bring, but I do know this: Atlas is not done with us. And something tells me the next shift, the next bend, will force every scientist on this planet to confront the possibility we've been avoiding since the moment it arrived. If it wants to come here, it will. And if it does, the story of humanity won't be the same afterward.
I didn't expect the call from NASA headquarters. Not on a Sunday. Not at 5:11 a.m. when the sky outside my apartment was still the color of diluted ink and the world was pretending to be asleep. My phone buzzed against the nightstand like it was panicking on my behalf. I answered before the second ring. A voice I didn't recognize spoke, clipped and steady in that way people adopt when they're holding something explosive behind their teeth. "We need you online now. Secure channel. Flag red." That last part sat like a stone in my stomach. Flag red doesn't happen in our field. It's for impacts, deflections, things that end up dramatized in movies about rocks from space. We don't use it for comets drifting through the solar system. But we do now, apparently. I logged in, still half-dressed, the cold floor under my bare feet snapping me awake in a single shock. The secure dashboard unfolded into a conference window crowded with faces, ashen, hollow-eyed, some lit by the gray glow of dawn, others by the sterile blue of lab fluorescence. Avery was there, leaning forward so close to his camera that his forehead almost touched the lens. Rosen looked like she hadn't slept in days. Hayes had the tense, jittering shoulders of someone who'd drunk too much coffee and still couldn't fight off the dread. Avery began without introduction. Atlas changed separation rate again. A single sentence, but enough to make my pulse slam into my throat. "How much?" I asked. He didn't make us wait. He shared his screen. The new trajectory appeared. Blue curve for predicted, red curve for observed, and then a new one, a thin gold line that hadn't existed in previous reports. And that gold line was bending, deliberately, unmistakably, toward a point along Earth's orbital path. Not a collision point, not an impact trajectory. Something worse, a rendezvous. Hayes whispered, "Jesus Christ." No one corrected him. Avery zoomed in on the intersection region. This alignment is energy optimal. There is no natural reason for the object to do this unless mass outflow occurs in a perfectly tuned continuous direction, which is incompatible with observed jet behavior. My fingers dug into the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. "How long has it been bending like this?" 5 hours, he said quietly. 5 hours! 5 hours of intentional-looking drift, unbroken, tight as a surgeon's incision. "What about fragmentation?" Rosen asked, her voice brittle. "Could internal collapse drive this?" Avery hesitated, and for scientists, hesitation is confession. "We examined that. Fragmentation noise would produce jitter, irregularity. Atlas is showing the opposite. It's smoothing its vector." A murmur erupted across the call, fear disguised as analysis. People talked over each other, citing uncertainties, invoking models, scrambling for explanations that didn't require uttering the truth hovering over all of us like a suspended blade. The truth that a comet shouldn't behave like this, couldn't behave like this. I forced myself to speak. "What's the delta V?" Avery typed quickly.
A number appeared on screen. My chest tightened. It wasn't large, actually, tiny, but precise. That was the problem. Nature produces chaos, randomness, asymmetry. This was choreography. Someone else on the call asked the question I was too afraid to voice. Are we considering controlled thrust? Silence. A few people blinked rapidly like they hoped their vision would reset and the question would vanish. Avery didn't blink at all. It is one of the models. Those words hit the room like a meteor. One of the models. Not dismissed, not laughed off. A line item on the table of possibilities. I suddenly felt hyper-aware of the world around me, the faint hum of my laptop fan, the distant sound of a garbage truck outside, the morning breeze slipping through a poorly closed window. The mundane world felt fractured by the scale of what we were discussing. "Show the shadow again," Rosen said. Avery pulled up the enhanced composite, the void inside the coma, the unnatural geometry, the thing that refused to rotate with the nucleus. I'd stared at it so long over the last 24 hours that it felt branded into my eyelids, but seeing it now, after the trajectory shift, felt different. It didn't look like a shadow anymore. It looked like a decision. "We need to assume," she said slowly, "that Atlas may not be a single body." That set off another wave of debate. People arguing mass distribution, density anomalies, fragment clusters, but I wasn't listening. My eyes were locked on the black form inside the coma, unmoving, watching, calculating, judging the space around it with a stillness that felt unnatural for anything drifting through violent solar winds. And then something happened, something I'll never forget. My screen flickered, not connection failure, but data updating mid-call. New astrometric point, new curve. The red line shifted again, just slightly, but more sharply than before. A collective inhale swept through the meeting. Avery's voice cracked. That's a course correction." Hayes slammed his palm on his desk. Someone else cursed. Rosen whispered, "Oh, God." And I felt the world tilt under me. Because at that exact moment, what had been improbable became undeniable. Comets don't correct course. Natural objects don't refine vectors toward orbital intersections. Chaos doesn't tighten into precision. Only intention does that. Avery recalculated impact parameters. The numbers scrolled past like a countdown. When they stopped, the projection was clear. If Atlas continued at this rate, it would cross Earth's orbital plane at a distance too narrow for comfort. Not a collision, but a choice. And that made it worse. The meeting devolved into controlled panic, people yelling over each other about whether to alert DoD, whether to classify the data, whether to initiate joint protocol with ESA and JAXA. Someone on the SETI end kept repeating, "This isn't contact, this isn't contact, this isn't contact," like he was trying to anchor himself to a reality he could still survive in. Finally, someone muted the entire call except for the panel leads. Avery leaned closer to the camera, his face pale. "We need to differentiate two scenarios. Scenario A, extreme natural anomaly. Scenario B, non-natural origin." No one corrected his phrasing, non-natural. The word alien didn't need to be spoken. It was sitting between us like a third presence in every room. Rosen took over. "If this object is natural, the drift will destabilize as fragmentation continues. If it is not..." She stopped. She didn't need to finish. "If it is not, then the drift will become smoother. And if it becomes smoother, then Atlas is under control. And if Atlas is under control, then someone built it." My phone buzzed with a private message from Hayes that, "Are you scared?" I didn't answer. Not because the answer was no, but because it was too much of a yes. The call ended abruptly. No conclusion, no comfort. Just a directive. Collect more data, update in 3 hours, do not disclose findings externally. I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark screen again, but this time my eyes looked different, wider, older, like they'd seen too much. Around noon, an encrypted file appeared in my inbox.
From the MIT colleague who'd warned me earlier about the rotation mismatch. I opened it. There was no message, just data. Radio reflectometry. Repeated pulses. Rhythmic. Structured. Not communication. Not a signal. Something stranger. Something like calibration. Every 40 minutes, Atlas emitted a microburst, too faint to detect without stacking the data across multiple observatories, too regular to be natural. The intervals were precise to within 2 milliseconds. My breath left my chest in a slow, shuddering sound. I checked the timestamps. The bursts began exactly when the drift began.
I felt something cold bloom inside me. Fear or awe, or a combination that didn't have a name yet. I wrote back, "Does anyone else know?" She responded instantly, "Only 3 people, and now you." I rubbed my temples, trying to assemble thoughts from fragments of panic. "Do you think it's artificial?" Her reply was immediate, brutal, and honest. "I think we don't have a natural model for what we're seeing." Not yes, but not no. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, feeling like gravity had shifted just a few degrees off-center. That's when Avery called me directly. No video, just his tired, cracked voice. "Listen," he said, "we ran long-term projections. If Atlas deviates again, just one more correction, we can no longer call it natural in good faith." "And then what?" I asked. There was a silence. Then we have to consider where it's going, and why." I swallowed hard. "Do you think it's coming here?" More silence. Then Avery spoke in a whisper I wasn't meant to hear. "I think Earth might be its target." My mouth went dry. My heartbeat pounded like a fist against my ribs. "But not for impact," he continued, "for proximity." I closed my eyes, feeling my pulse in my eyelids. Proximity, rendezvous, approach, words that shouldn't exist in the same sentence as comet. "What do we tell the world?" I whispered. "Not yet," Avery said. "We give it one more correction, one more sign. If it turns toward Earth even slightly, then the debate ends, and everything changes." He hung up before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, staring at the frozen shadow inside the coma, feeling like I was being watched through the screen, not metaphorically, literally. And in that moment, the realization hit me with a force that felt physical. If Atlas turns toward Earth, it won't be an accident. It won't be coincidence. It won't be a comet. And whatever it is, it's almost done hiding. I didn't notice the sun setting. I didn't notice the coffee going cold. I didn't notice the messages piling up in the corner of my screen like digital debris. The only thing I noticed, the only thing any of us noticed, was the countdown to the next astrometric update. Because every projection, every model, every whispered calculation pointed to one truth none of us could say out loud. If Atlas corrected course again, even by a fraction, then everything we believed about our place in the universe was about to tilt. I sat in the dim lab, the soft glow of my monitor throwing my shadow up the wall like a stretched silhouette of my own anxiety. It was too quiet. Even the building's HVAC seemed to hold its breath. At 6:14 p.m., the next data point arrived. A tiny notification in the corner of my screen, absurdly ordinary for something capable of rewriting human history. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I wasn't ready. Not emotionally, not intellectually, not in any of the ways a person should be ready to confront whether an interstellar object was choosing to approach our planet. But the universe doesn't wait for readiness, it just moves. So I clicked. For a moment, nothing changed.
The solver spun. The trajectory graph flickered. The room felt like it tilted by a fraction of a degree, and I wasn't sure whether it was the building or me. Then the red curve snapped into place, and the world I'd trusted for my entire life snapped with it. Another correction. Clear, clean, intentional. If the previous drift was a nudge, this one was a whisper spoken directly into our ear. I couldn't breathe. My mind went white and loud at the same time. I heard myself say, "It corrected," but the words sounded distant, like I was listening to someone else speak through my mouth. Before I could collect myself, the secure line rang. Avery, Rosen, Hayes, half the task force. Faces in panic or denial or stunned resignation. The heavy hitters who'd spent their entire careers arguing that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence were now staring at evidence that made even their skepticism crumble. Avery's voice was raw. "I assume you've seen the new vector." I nodded. No one needed to describe it. The shift was unmistakable. A natural object would never produce that level of coherence in coarse refinement. It wasn't drifting, it was steering. Rosen rubbed her face, her fingers trembling. "We're out of natural explanations. All of them. Every jet model fails. Every fragmentation model fails. The object is moving as if it's responding to an external objective." "Or internal," Hayes said quietly. That thought sat in the air like smoke. Something inside Atlas directing it, guiding it, choosing. I leaned forward. "Where is the new trajectory taking it?" Avery pulled up the projection. A thin black curve appeared, a refinement of the previous dotted line, but sharper, more confident, the mathematical equivalent of purpose. The curve intersected the region of Earth's orbit, not precisely at Earth, but too close, too aligned, like something aiming for a meeting point. Avery spoke softly, almost reverently. "If it continues this path, it reaches our orbital corridor in 18 months. No one spoke. I could hear my own pulse. I could hear the quiet static of my microphone. I could hear the faint hum of the monitor. And beneath all that, some deeper instinctual sound. Fear, or awe, or both, blended into a single ancient chord. "We have to tell the public," someone on the ESA line said. "No," Rosen countered immediately. "Not yet. Panic would break supply chains, markets, governments. We need more certainty." "What more certainty do you need?" someone else shot back. "A comet doesn't steer." That sentence hung in the air like a verdict. Avery cleared his throat. "There is one possibility we haven't explored fully." The room froze. You could feel dozens of minds bracing at once. If Atlas is fragmenting internally, and the core is significantly denser or more compact than the outer shell, mass redistribution could— "It's not fragmentation," I said before I could stop myself. They looked at me, surprised, even offended. But I didn't back down. I shared my screen and pulled up the shadow map, the same one that had kept me awake 2 nights in a row. I flipped through the wavelengths: infrared, visible, ultraviolet, radio backscatter, all of them showing the same impossible silhouette, a dark geometric void inside the coma, unmoving as the comet rotated around it. This shadow is orientation stable. It does not rotate with the nucleus. If fragmentation were occurring, we'd see rotation jitter, luminosity variance, displacement noise. Instead, the shadow remains fixed. Rosen exhaled sharply. Hayes swore under his breath. Someone whispered, "That's impossible." But the data didn't care whether they believed it. It just sat there, cold and silent and undeniable. Avery leaned forward, squinting as if he could will the universe into making more sense. "What are you suggesting?" I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry. My whole body felt like it had been hollowed and filled with static. "I'm suggesting," I said, slowly, carefully, painfully, "that Atlas has a core, a stable, structured, non-fragmenting core, something that maintains orientation, something not governed by the rotational dynamics of the outer shell. Like a prode, someone whispered. Not me. I wasn't brave enough to say it first. But once the word was out, it didn't leave. It seeped into every mind on the call. Probe. Not comet. Not visitor. Purpose-built. Designed. Hayes turned his video off, probably because he didn't want us to see his face. Rosen stared downward, her lips pressed together, as if holding back a scream or a prayer or both. Avery broke the silence. Even if we consider that possibility, we need more evidence, and we don't have enough to justify that leap. But his eyes flicked sideways, a tiny involuntary movement that betrayed the real truth. He didn't believe that anymore. Not fully. Not enough to say out loud, but enough to fear it, enough to prepare for it. What about the microbursts? I asked. Have we analyzed the timing pattern? Avery stiffened. The room went quiet. Everyone knew about the microbursts, even if they were pretending the data was too preliminary to matter. He eventually nodded. Yes, and the pattern persists. 40-minute intervals, stable to within 2 milliseconds. Even the background noise of the call seemed to stop. A natural object doesn't keep time. A natural object doesn't emit periodic pulses. A natural object doesn't regulate itself like a machine. Rosen whispered, "Then it's not random." Avery took a breath, slow and painful. "No, it isn't." Before we could continue, a new notification flashed at the top of my screen. Real-time astrometric update, priority 1. My heart dropped. We all watched as the new point loaded, as the solver processed the data, as the curve redrew itself with the cold inevitability of mathematics that no human wish could bend. And then, the correction sharpened. More than before, more directed, more precise. A deliberate nudge towards Earth's orbital path. Not enough to scream disaster, but enough to whisper intent. Rosen's voice cracked. It's choosing proximity. Avery nodded, his face drained of color. We're past natural explanations. This is behavioral. A word that should never apply to a comet. A word that changes everything. He continued, his tone low and grave. If Atlas makes even one more correction, and it is trending toward doing so, then Earth is the only viable rendezvous point within the energy envelope. And that means he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The implication was clear. Atlas wasn't coming to crash.
Atlas was coming to arrive. Hayes finally unmuted, his voice shaking. If it approaches Earth, then we're not dealing with a comet, and if we're not dealing with a comet, then we're not dealing with something indifferent. The call dissolved into whispers and arguments and strained breaths. I muted my microphone and leaned back, feeling the weight of something immense pressing down on my ribs, squeezing until my breaths came thin and shallow, because the truth was finally unavoidable, and it hit me with a clarity that bordered on nausea. Atlas is not wandering. It is navigating. And the moment it aligns with Earth's orbit, the debate ends forever. Governments will have to respond. The world will have to know. Humanity will have to face something it has avoided even imagining with sincerity. And then Avery's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. If Atlas comes to Earth, it is not a comet. The words echoed through my head long after the call ended. I stared at the trajectory map glowing on my screen, the red curve creeping closer to the black one like a secret leaning toward a confession. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the panic and the disbelief, a thought rose like a whisper from a dark room. It's approaching us because it wants to. And if it wants to, then it already knows we're here.
The night the final dataset arrived, I was alone in the lab again, though not because anyone told me to stay late. No one needed to. Sleep had become irrelevant. Food, an afterthought. Normal life, a dim echo of something that belonged to someone else. All that mattered was the next correction, the next curve, the next sign that Atlas was moving with purpose. 12 minutes before midnight, the building lights switched into energy-saving mode, humming as they dimmed, leaving only the monitors to illuminate the room. The world outside was silent in that eerie, fragile way cities become when the moon hangs low and the streets empty out, as if everything living senses a tension it can't name. My computer chimed, a new telemetry pack, smaller than usual, almost compressed, like the universe was holding back the truth for one last second before letting it slip through the cracks. I opened it. The trajectory plot loaded slowly, each pixel dragging across the screen like a breath struggling through a tight chest. My heart beat once, twice, and then the curve appeared. I felt the air leave my lungs in a shaky exhale. Atlas had corrected, again, not a drift, not an aberration, a correction, sharp and elegant, curving the object into a path that would bring it through Earth's orbital corridor with a precision natural forces could never produce. My hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the overwhelming sense that I was witnessing the moment humanity's story split into before and after. I whispered the numbers, barely hearing myself. 18 months, intersection within 0.01 AU, intentional vector. My voice cracked on the last word, intentional. The solver flashed again, an automated note, a derivative prediction based purely on mathematics, stripped of emotion or meaning. But the meaning was undeniable. Atlas wasn't coming to hit us. It was coming to meet us. The secure line buzzed. I answered. Avery's face appeared, ghost pale in the glow of a single desk lamp. His voice was quiet, as if speaking any louder might break something fragile. You saw it. I nodded. He looked down, swallowed hard, then back up at me. The steering pattern is deliberate. We've all reviewed it. There's no dissent left. That sentence hit me harder than the trajectory itself. No dissent. Scientists don't unify around extraordinary claims. They tear them apart, piece by piece, until only the truth remains. And now the truth was this. Atlas was under control. Rosen joined the call next, hair disheveled, eyes red. She didn't bother with greetings. We have to discuss the final scenario. I felt my heartbeat quicken. The Earth approach scenario? No, she said softly. The meaning. Hayes joined with a low buzz, the background behind him filled with papers, half-empty mugs, and the chaos of someone unraveling quietly. We ran psychological models. What happens if we release this to the public? And? I asked. He shook his head. Once people understand the object is steering, the panic index spikes beyond anything we've seen in simulations. Markets collapse, infrastructure strains, institutions fracture, even without a threat. Just the knowledge. Avery added, "We're preparing an emergency briefing for the White House, but the recommendation, at least for now, is controlled disclosure." Controlled disclosure. A phrase that meant we tell them something, but not everything. But something inside me rebelled. What if it actually comes to Earth? I asked. My voice sounded small. Rosen leaned closer to her camera, her expression unreadable. If it comes to Earth, then it isn't a comet. And if it isn't a comet, then hiding the truth becomes impossible. When do we know for sure? I whispered. When it chooses, Avery said. The call ended abruptly, but the silence afterwards felt louder than any alarm. I stared at the new trajectory still glowing on my screen, the curve narrowing like a noose tightening around the last threads of denial. The lab felt colder. The air felt heavier. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, steady but fragile, like it wasn't built to withstand the weight of what it was carrying. I opened the shadow file, the void inside the coma, unmoving, watching. It felt less like a structure now, more like an eye. I don't know why the thought came to me then, but it did. What if Atlas had been here before?
Not this object, but others like it. What if this was normal, just not for us? My hands hovered over the keyboard as a kind of awful clarity washed over me. We weren't witnessing a threat. We were witnessing contact. Not communication, not greetings, not a declaration. Something simpler. Something older. Observation. My computer chimed again, an internal alert from the JPL radio team. A new series of microbursts had been detected. But this time, the intervals weren't uniform. They were shortening, tightening, as if Atlas was preparing for something, aligning, synchronizing, counting down. I felt adrenaline surge through me so hard my vision blurred. I opened the pulse log. 40-minute intervals had become 39.8, then 39.6, then 39.3. I typed a quick message to Avery. Pulse intervals decreasing. Preparing for maneuver. He replied instantly. Yes. One word. Heavy as a verdict. My breathing felt shallow. I stared at the pulses accelerating with the calm precision of something not just aware, but alive. And then the realization hit me so hard I had to grip the desk to steady myself. They weren't pulses. They were engine checks. Atlas was preparing to change trajectory again. And this time, the correction wouldn't be subtle. It would be decisive. A choice. A declaration. A revelation. I watched the intervals tick down, the cold numbers flickering across my screen like the seconds before a launch. 39.1 minutes, 38.9, 38.7. Every shift tightening a knot in my stomach until it felt hard to inhale. I whispered to no one, if it turns towards us, it's not a comet. The room felt too still, too quiet, like the universe itself was waiting. The solver chimed, new astrometry incoming. My hands shook as I clicked. The numbers loaded, the curve redrew, and Atlas began to turn, not fully, not completely, but unmistakably toward Earth's orbital position. I felt my pulse spike so violently it hurt. The breath I'd been holding slipped out in a broken exhale. I whispered, barely audible, it's choosing us. In that moment, the weight of every unanswered question fell onto me with crushing force. If Atlas is approaching intentionally, what does it want? If someone built it, where are they now? And the question that hollowed me out the most, why us? The world doesn't know yet, but it will. Because Atlas is coming. Not to collide, not to wander, to arrive. And the moment it does, humanity will meet something older, stranger, and far more patient than anything we have ever imagined. And whatever happens next, we won't face the universe the same way again.